So you provided your initial understandings of research and the baseline. I did another take at that in that week 1 reflection, and the answers changed a little bit. Your conception of research, I can already see some slight changes to how you're thinking about that term. Now, some of the things are still there, like Google and statistics and knowledge, right? But other things are coming a little bit more into the foreground, right? Thinking, scientific, these kinds of things. Right? All right, so of the 10 first principles we talked about, directing our semester in these 4 buckets, which one do you think is most relevant to our topic for today, the good research question?
Can you say the question again?
Yeah, so of all of these 10 first principles, which one is most relevant to our topic today, which is the good research question?
Research is systematic.
Okay, why? Why would you pick that one?
I think there was something in the Bayless article
Yeah.
about systematic research and applying like steps in scientific method.
Yeah, so coming to a question that's
Yeah.
going to direct your research
Yeah.
should be somewhat of a systematic
Mhm.
process, right? Although creativity is involved in that, there's also a system. The Frey reading was really all about a system of generating questions, clearly, right? So research is systematic. Any other?
I would say research must account for diverse perspectives and identities.
Okay, why would you say that?
Because when you're saying like the term a good research question,
Yeah.
I think good would have to come from, whose perspective
Absolutely.
describes what good means. So I think to kind of identify who you're talking to would be a good place to start.
Yeah, so it's imbued with sort of moral, or virtue, right? The goodness of this question. Good from whose perspective, says who, through what, what lens are you looking at that for? So, yeah, both of those principles are relevant for our time today. In fact, I would say these 2 buckets, critical thinking and cultural proficiency, are the principles that underlie our discussion about what comprises a good research question, right? So a good question provides a structured starting point. Without a clear question, the process can't proceed systematically. A good research question connects to prior research, so it should demonstrate that science is cumulative. It ensures that we build on what is known rather than starting from scratch. A good question also sets up what kind of inference we can make. Are we making conceptual, population, causal? What kind of inferences are we making is going to be embedded in our question. So if your question has language like explain, right, or underlying, or cause, any kind of causal language, right, that would suggest that we're going to try to make a causal inference. We're going to try to figure out causality rather than just correlation. Right? Also related are these cultural proficiency principles. The question we ask is shaped by our cultural assumptions. A good question requires recognizing that we have certain ways of looking at the world, and we're going to craft questions that reflect that culture. And then a good question also includes, rather than excludes, voices and context. For example, how do audiences respond to news is weaker than how do audiences across different racial or age groups respond to news, recognizing that there may be some good, right, markers of a good question that would necessitate we bring in specific groups of people or identities, or at least recognize there could be differences across those particular kinds of identities. So when we say a good research question, we're not just talking about something that's theoretically, practically, and methodologically sound, but also culturally attentive. Right? So the Babylos article, I like it, and I know it's dense, and I put it in there just to kind of test and see, in terms of whether it's a good fit for this class. Maybe so, maybe not. The reason I like it is just because it kind of upends a more static approach, which is what you find in the other reading. The research begins with curiosity. Questions emerge from everyday life, from our interactions, from watching something interesting on television, or having a conversation with someone yesterday at lunch when you start talking about dating and you think you're having one conversation and then you understand that you're having these kind of weird parallel conversations that suggest there's some huge generational differences in that terminology. So Vavilos reminds us that curiosity, right, the step of kind of generating a research question is fragile. It's tentative, but it's still worth pursuing. Research starts when something puzzles us, and we want to know more. Questions don't arrive fully formed, they need sharpening. So what's something, so my example was dating, right? What is something that's interested you lately that you might want to know more about? What are some observations you've been making as you maybe walk across campus or go to the grocery store or go home for the weekend, go to a football game?
I want to know how those little robots work.
Okay, yeah, there's these things that are like, going around campus. What are they? What are they?
Where'd they come from?
Where do they come from?
They stop at the little crosswalk.
And they stop, and what happens when they get stuck? So all these questions surrounding what we call these robots. Yeah, absolutely. What are these things? Where are they coming from? What are they doing? How do you get one? What else? Yeah.
I feel like why younger kids act so much older than like how we acted when we were younger.
Okay. So you've noticed, then when you say younger kids, what ages are you talking about?
Like 10 to like 14 probably.
Okay, so your tween, kind of early teen
Yeah.
years. Why are they acting so much older, or putting on an older vibe
Mhm.
than you remember being when you were that age? What else?
Like why people decide to go out on certain nights of the week, like a Thursday.
Yeah, what is it about Thursday?
It makes no sense
Yeah.
to me. It's like no Friday, no Saturday, Thursday, Tuesday. It's just
I mean, Saturday's Grove Day, right? If it's a home game, I suppose, right? But then, what happened to Friday? Why do we push that to Thursday?
right. It's like,
Yeah. What is this culture of Thursday night partying?
mhm.
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Why some people pay for college just to go out.
That's right. Yeah. What is the kind of the draw of college if it isn't academics, right? If it's social, like you're paying for a social experience. What explains that?
There's just one of my friends has not been to class at all, but he's been out every week or every day since he's got here.
Yeah. So he's passing. He's acing the party, and maybe not so much acing the class life. What else?
Who cleans up the grove?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. How does that work?
I walked out there the next day and it was all gone, and I was like,
Yeah, early Sunday morning, man, you don't see any trash, right? It's a miracle, absolutely. Porta potties are gone. It's incredible. I mean, grove culture in general, and did anybody grow up coming to Ole Miss games? I mean, it's different this year. I mean, used to be there was a rope around the grove until 4 o'clock on Friday, and then they would blow this whistle, and then it was like mad dash to put your tent up where you wanted your tent. And now you can pay someone, $10 grand or whatever, and they'll throw your tent up for you, and they'll secure a place, and you're just like at home chilling out. You don't have to worry about it, right? Lots of differences, right? Interesting, so are you sitting in the same place that you have sat? Sophia's not, but the rest of you pretty much are, right? Maybe one or two of you, but why is that, right? And you notice that in your other classes, you don't have assigned seats, but if someone were in your seat when you showed up to class, you feel uncomfortable. You're like, well, they're in my seat. As in, it's only the second week of class, right? What is it about, right, staking your claim? And God forbid you go to church on a Sunday and someone's in, your family's pew, right? I mean, that would be horrid, right? So people gravitate to a preferred spot for whatever reason. Some of us don't care. Other of us,
Okay.
you do care,
I
but
do
someone
care.
was in your seat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right? So, these are interesting things, right? Some people in a grocery store carefully compare labels. They'll like pull the box off the shelf, they look at something. I don't know what they're looking at. I'm assuming it's an ingredient list or a label or something. Other people, right? They're just throwing stuff in a cart, right? They're not doing a lot of heavy lifting on looking at stuff, right? So, what might predict those differences, right? So, curiosity sparks research. This is an outline of what an academic article looks like, right? It's got an abstract, it's got an introduction section, it's got a lit review, it's got a method section, it's got a results section, a discussion section, maybe a conclusion, some acknowledgement, some references. Very structured. They all look the same. They all pretty much have the same headings, even if the subheadings are different. They all have very similar language, right? They say things like, the data were used for this, blah, blah, blah. This study was limited by, blah. There's all these sort of statements that you can pull out of academic articles, right, almost verbatim, right? And yet, every single one of those articles probably started with a conversation of some sort across coffee or lunch, or someone's walking on campus and notices robots and decides, I want to do a whole program of research on, delivery service on college campuses or whatever the case might be. So what we see, what we read, those long readings that I'm forcing y'all to read, right, is the product of a much larger process that involves all kinds of steps and nonlinear processes and messiness and meetings over coffee and so forth and so on. Have you ever heard this phrase, garbage in, garbage out? Nobody? I don't know where it originated, but in general, it just means whether it's ChatGPT, if you put a garbage prompt in, you're going to get a garbage result out, or a search like on a Google, right? So what you get as a product is only as good as the materials that you feed. So Papa John's, right? What Papa John's? What do they say? What's their tagline? Anybody? Better
Pizza.
Better ingredients, better pizza, right? Domino's came out with a new ad campaign recently, and they sort of admitted that their pizza used to taste like cardboard, and they said we've rectified that. We've had, they basically were like, now we're Papa John's, we have better ingredients, whatever, right? And so the idea, right, that if you cook, right, if you have garbage ingredients, you're going to have a garbage product at the end. Better ingredients, right? Better pizza. In terms of research, right, what this means basically is poor questions lead to poor answers. When we have bad questions or nondescript questions, right, we're going to define what good here is in a minute, we're going to have bad answers. We're not going to have the kind of answers that we need to satisfy the kinds of real curiosity that we might have. So the way that you ask a question shapes the kind of knowledge that you can build. It shapes the kind of research that you look at to build an argument for why this study is needed. So from the Fry et al. Reading, if we start with fuzzy, shallow, or biased questions, the whole project collapses. The quality of answers depends directly on the quality of the question. So let's imagine that you and some friends decided to explore the square on, well, I said Friday night, but maybe it's a Thursday night, whatever, right? So maybe it's Thursday night, right? Sidewalks are crowded. People are lining up at restaurants and bars. Cars are honking at intersections. The energy is high. And now imagine in the middle of all this, you see chickens. Like actual, real chickens. Darting across North Lamar. Right? You're like, whoa, right? Chickens. Makes you laugh. But then you wonder, why did the chicken cross the road? Right? That's a natural question. If you started to see chickens darting across the road, why did the chicken cross the road? Now that is a fun question. Funny. I mean, it's kind of a dad joke, but I'm a dad, so you'll forgive me for that. But as a research question, it's too vague. It doesn't give you a clear way to collect evidence. So what would you actually have to do to answer that question?
You would have to observe what they did when they got to the other side of the road.
I mean, maybe you could assume that they're on the other side of the road and that's why they crossed. Maybe there's some food over there or something.
I'd like to figure out how they got there.
Okay. Would that tell you why they crossed the road, though? It'll tell you why they got there, or who put them there, or maybe why those people wanted them to cross the road, or otherwise.
Maybe just like what's around them, like, you know what I mean? Like if there's a lot of people, or if there's like noises.
Yeah, I mean, you could speculate. Maybe they crossed the road because there's too much noise, or there's food on the other side. I mean, what would you actually have to do to answer that question? Why?
Be a chicken?
You'd have to ask the chicken,
Yes.
right? You're like, why'd you cross the road?
I'm just kidding.
And it's like, it's like pecking the microphone, right? So you would actually, to answer that question, have to ask the chicken, why'd you cross the road? So a better research question might narrow down the who, what, where, or when. For instance, how many chickens crossed North Lamar Boulevard in downtown Oxford between 9 and 11 p.m. Friday, August 29th? Right? That would be a more specific question. But is it too narrow? Like, would the answer be interesting for any reason? To know that, 14 chickens crossed the road, or 4 chickens, or 400 chickens. I mean, maybe for a news story, but that would be like one sentence, maybe, in the news story, or the headline: 400 chickens crossed the road, right? But that's not really, people would read that, and then what would they want?
To know why.
They probably want to know, right, the answer to that more fuzzy question, so they would want all that speculation. They would want you to talk to the people that, let the chickens out, right, as opposed to the dogs, I suppose, right? They would want you to talk to, like, explore the other side to see what was there versus here. They would want you to speculate about the noises or the congestion, or what has Oxford come to that all of these chickens are, right, even on the square on a Friday night, right? So we want to be clear, but we also want to be focused and meaningful. We want our question to generate the kind of answers that would lead to interesting things, right? Things that would inform us and entertain us, but also allow us to live a better life, to raise our kids in a better community, and so forth. So we might zoom out and we may ask then a more complex question, like what are some of the social factors that occurred in Oxford, Mississippi between July and August 2025 that would cause chickens to cross North Lamar Boulevard? So if this was our question, what kind of evidence could we collect to answer this broader version of the question? We wouldn't have to ask chickens, so that's good.
You could ask like the businesses around maybe.
Yeah, we could start interviewing business owners.
Yeah, just check local events going on.
Yeah, we could figure out, okay, on the calendar of community events, what was happening between July and August, and maybe we could compare that to what was happening in June, and maybe what was happening last year at this time, and the year before that at this time. So there may be some documents. We don't have to ask people. We can just look at historical records. What else?
As locals.
Okay, we can go interview locals, right? People that frequent the square on a regular basis, particularly on Friday night. We could find those individuals. We could interview those people. What else? What you described is using multiple methods, right? Looking at the historical record, talking to business owners, interviewing business, maybe doing a survey of business owners, maybe doing individual interviews with local residents. Multiple methods that start to compile the evidence that you would need to explore the idea that there may be some social factors that can explain, again, back to our fuzzy question, why, not only why did the chickens cross the road, but why were they even there to cross the road in the first place? So notice how our revised questions about chickens become more specific, more researchable, and more connected to specific evidence that we can collect to begin to argue a particular point. You can count chickens, you can't ask them questions. You can analyze local conditions. In general then, a good research question, first and foremost, allows a researcher to take an arguable position. An arguable position, in essence, you're not just describing something obvious, you're posing a question that someone could reasonably debate and investigate with evidence. And that's really the essence of research, to make arguable cases for or against certain positions. You pose a problem that's theoretical or practical or methodological. You allow the formulation of hypotheses and predictions that you can test against evidence. And you build a program of asking and answering and asking and answering and asking and answering questions. This is the backbone. A good research question is one where evidence could support or challenge an answer. There's no way, if there's no way to be wrong, it's not really research. Or if the answer is so simple, like yes or no, it's right, it's not really fun research. Maybe it is research, right? Maybe you need that sometimes, right? But it's not really fun research. And a lot of times those arguable positions will generate more questions that, again, right, need to be turned from fuzzy initial questions to more directed questions. So under this notion of arguable, I'll add that research questions should matter. Not only should you sort of pose questions that can be answered with evidence, but you should pose questions that matter. Sometimes it's interesting because it connects to a theoretical problem, and of course that's the academic in me saying that. Maybe you don't care about those kinds of things, right? But when you ask questions like why, you're basically asking theoretical questions. Why do we have these robots? Like, what was the need, right? Like, what need did these things serve in the first place? I mean, clearly they serve a need. They're all over the place, right? They're everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's one of these little white things, and you got them tripping over them, and they're stuck in the gutter, and right, all the crazy stuff, right? I mean, clearly there was a need. What was that need? What does it say about our society, about campus, about students, right? To suggest that there's a need for this kind of thing. So theoretically, right, I could answer, I could pose questions about robots that were, more practical, but also as theoretical. It matters theoretically, right? It tells me something about society or about campus or about students or whatever. So I want to push our understanding of concepts. Sometimes it's interesting because it addresses a practical problem in the real world, like reducing misinformation or improving health campaigns or disparities in digital access. And sometimes it's interesting because it raises a methodological problem, testing whether a new way of studying something works better. Is the way that we study media consumption, because it's a holdover from when we used to have cable television and television in general, like the word TV used to mean something other than a box on your wall, right? Are some of the measures that we use now for media consumption, are they outdated and therefore need to be revised? Right? A question that's interesting engages both you as the researcher. I would tell my PhD students when they were working on dissertations is you need a dissertation topic that you're not going to be bored with inside of 6 months, because this is a 6 month to a year-long process, right? So as a researcher, whether you're beginning a research program or you're a seasoned researcher, the question has to engage you. It has to interest you enough to sustain your working on it, right, for longer than a week when you get bored. but also your audience. And in the Fry article, that reading really stresses that our audience might be other academics, it might be practitioners, it might be the general public, right? So we have a variety of audiences, and we have to ask questions that they care about. So the first point is that a good research question is arguable, meaning you answer it with evidence, and under that, I'm saying it also needs to be interesting enough. Like, it doesn't need to be an argument just for the sake of argument. It needs to be an argument that helps us in some way, that advances our knowledge theoretically, practically, methodologically in some way. Second thing that makes a good research question is it's easy to understand with lots of extra explanation. You know, like the jokes that you tell and no one laughs because like you totally, right, way over their head, right? So bad joke needs, when you have to explain a joke, it becomes like, now it's not funny. Right, now I'm mad that I told this thing because now I got to sit here for 5 minutes and have to explain the joke to you. Same thing with the research question, right? A bad research question is like, okay, now I need you to give me the dissertation version of this for me to even understand what you're trying to ask. If you read it aloud to a classmate, they should immediately know the direction you're heading. Clarity means the words aren't fuzzy, they're not overloaded, the main concept of the question is accessible. It doesn't mean that there are not a few words, that there aren't a few ways to conceptualize or measure something. Right, so a question could have a term that could be defined in a variety of ways, like the agenda setting stuff we talked about last week. There's a variety of ways to conceptualize and measure agenda setting. So it's not that you can't use a word that has multiple meanings. It just means that you are not likely to be talking over each other when you ask your question. So the second thing a good research question does, or is it's clear. Third, a good question is focused. The chicken example shows why this matters. Asking, why did the chicken cross the road is way too broad. You could spin in circles forever. You can interview chickens all day long, but you'll never get an answer. But asking how many chickens is much tighter. So a focused question makes it possible to conduct a literature review, design a method, and produce findings that are actually meaningful rather than scattered. Similarly, you don't want a research question that runs on like a paragraph. You don't need 3 commas and a semicolon to get through a good research question. If you do, it's probably too long. So conciseness doesn't mean leaving out necessary detail, but it does mean stripping away extra words so the question has some punch and direction. So focused and concise, sort of 2 sides of the same coin. Narrow enough to study meaningfully and not too wordy or vague. And finally, a good research question is sort of the antithesis of the counter-argument of that. It's complex. It's not so focused and so concise that it's so simple, right? Yes or no. So not answerable in one breath. Although does something exist is a good starting point. Finding one example of that thing answers the question, right? Are there robots on campus? Yes, like I'm done, right? Why are there robots on campus, right? Now it's a little bit better of a question. So if you ask whether chickens cross roads, all you have to do is find one chicken crossing one road and you're done. A good research question requires explanation, evidence, and analysis. It asks about relationships, comparisons, or underlying causes. And that complexity is what makes the question worth researching. So when you're crafting a research question, keep these in mind. Complex, concise, focused, clear, arguable, and interesting, although I like 5 instead of 6, so I'll put that under arguable. The chicken story may be silly, but the process we follow to turn a bad question into a better question is exactly what researchers do. They turn curiosity into researchable, meaningful questions. My thesis project when I was a master's student, for instance, started when my now wife and I were not married or even dating. whatever that meant, right, at the time. We had gone on one date, I think. Anyway, we were at the beach. Her parents had a condo rented for the weekend. She invited like all the grad students, and I was the only one that said yes. Imagine that, because everybody else was like, "Oh no, y'all like each other, so like we're not going down there." We were good friends, and so we were holding hands down the beach, and I said, "Whatever." Right? This is this is several years ago, right? Different times, and we were holding hands. We were holding hands like this, what I call palm to palm.
Good friends don't do that.
Well.
Mm.
And we stopped at this place you could sit, right? There was an old like washed up piece of wood or whatever. We sat down and we talked about how we liked each other, right? We had that conversation, right? I like you, maybe we should date, right? And then when we walked back, we were holding hands like this. Yeah, see? Totally different experience, right? And so I started thinking, I wonder if that means anything. I wonder if there are sort of common assumptions that people make about other people who are holding hands in different ways, right? In other words, do you make assumptions about their relationship, particularly along the dimensions of intimacy, how close they are, how likely they are to be sort of in a close relationship, and power? Right? Does it matter if one person's hand is on top? Right? Do you make an assumption that the person who has their hand on top in that scenario is the person hierarchically, right, that has the more power in the relationship? And so I designed an experiment to study that and have different ways in which people were holding hands. And it was famous around campus because it was the hand holding study. People had to look at like 200 pictures of hands and answer all these questions about them. Funny enough, my sister's husband actually did that study anyway. So. Small world phenomenon. And what I found is, yes, hand position matters. People believe that hand position means the person whose hand is on top has more relative power in the relationship. And this is seen as more intimate than this. This is seen as more intimate than this. Right? Doesn't mean that those people are more intimate, because the people that were holding hands in my pictures were graduate students that one was gay and one male, female holding hands, guy was gay, and the one was married to another guy. So like there was no relationship, but friends there. So it doesn't mean that the people holding hands are more or less differential in terms of power intimacy, but when you see someone holding hands a certain way, you make assumptions about them and their relationship, right? And that's what I sort of, and I framed it in a particular theoretical framework, and it was interesting to other scholars who were interested in the meanings that we derive from certain kinds of nonverbal behavior, right? So again, something that started with a very fuzzy question, I wonder what that means, does it mean anything to other people when they see, turned into a pretty clear experiment with hypotheses and statistics and all this sort of things, right? So that's what I want you to do. So I want you to get into groups of 3 or 4. These are the questions or versions of the questions that you put on your reading check quiz, those of you that took that quiz. These are the questions. So I want you to take one of those questions, and I want you to interrogate that question for whether it is arguable, clear, focused, concise, and complex. And if the answer is no, then rewrite it so it is more arguable, more clear, more focused, more concise, and more complex. All right, so you got about 10, 15 minutes to do that, and then we'll chat about what you did. Yeah, if you need to come up here, it's kind of small, so you need to come there and read.
Yeah, I guess.
They may not be on the Blackboard version, but they may have to.
Is that what? Well, because I've been trying to do the work because I feel like I'm getting behind, and like I go on Blackboard and there's nothing there online.
Yeah, right now they're just readings and
really
just,
short
no.
one, like how is it fun?
Yeah, there's not much right on the page other than the readings, quizzes.
Because how is created to be defined as IMC? Like, it's so short. You
But
can have
there's
it
other work.
like,
No, let's chat. Yeah, let's chat after.
it's so short. It's like it's
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
freaking out with everybody doing all this work, and I'm like, where's mine?
Yeah, we'll talk, we'll chat.
Instagram
How to do
marketing.
marketing, public opinion, especially like
I think the
research
first
and
person
building.
created, I don't know.
So you guys are in.
Is it hard?
Like,
Or communication.
You're good. Is it arguable?
So how do you make this more arguable?
I just feel like there's a lot of different ways to creativity. We're going to have social marketing shape the way your audience is.
Oh, we're picking any questions?
Yeah, pick any one of
Oh, I
those.
thought we were doing all of them.
No, just pick one, and then go through all the criteria, and then if it doesn't meet one of the criteria, then rewrite it.
Is creativity and also.
Hint, none of these questions meet any of the criteria.
Really?
I mean, maybe one or two of them meet one of the criteria, but none of them meet all 5 of the criteria.
So you could do.
Yeah, make it loud. Okay,
So just remember, like, how like,
we're trying to pick a question.
Is personal creativity aspect of innovation. Yeah. I'm just saying after we phrase,
So you
start
wanna
with
do,
making it arguable.
creativity defines
Is personal creativity defined
Oh,
in
how
your
does
marketing?
use of AI generated content?
make it clear.
Yeah.
Is personal creativity integrated in marketing?
Use
Integrated
of
in
AI generated content in journalism.
Yeah,
Feedback,
an aspect
I
of,
see.
an aspect of
audience,
integrating.
trust,
Okay, clear.
and
That
perceptions
should be a thought.
of credibility.
Okay, not word.
That
More complex.
Yeah, so straight down the hall to the right.
It has to be like.
Okay, we chose
Direction is easy to follow.
Wait, is that doable? Do we just add it?
It has to be.
Yeah, because personal, we've changed it from how it is creativity to is personal creativity defined, or an aspect of.
He's not wordy at all.
Direction is easy to follow. You think so?
I think
I thought it was pretty clear.
We're doing the put it, is it assignment?
It's also a percent of personal.
Is it shared
question.
class?
I'm
I'll just like
Let's
stop.
stop.
Okay. We can give it. Okay, this is the question we chose.
How would we define creativity structurally in the question?
So now we have to like decide if it matches any of it doesn't, right?
Or in
Wait, so,
what
like, they
ways
all fall
does
short.
creativity
You said we
become an aspect of?
Yeah. Okay. Is it marketing?
I'm just, my brain is just over. Okay.
It's not.
Buddy.
Is there more than answer? Chat.
Creativity.
It's not really.
I feel like you could have a hypothesis, right? Yeah. Like, that's what it is.
Wait, do we have to change it for each one? Or we
Here,
should
it's
get
fine.
someone
Okay,
else?
keep it there and then we'll. Okay. Is it clear? Easy to solve.
My problem with the word
I feel like it's
creativity,
Wait,
oh, I don't wanna start.
Like, I, there's no, there's nothing to it.
Yeah.
But is it too
Wait,
slow?
what?
Answer whatever.
I don't know.
Or like,
Hard
find
to
a social media
be.
marketing versus whatever.
I mean, I think it is clear. I think it's clear. I think it does fit number
Like,
two.
So like integrated marketing.
Focus, narrow, not
Like how do you integrate it into
No,
social
I feel
media?
like it's
No,
not.
other marketing,
No.
Because I can give you an answer.
like billboard, whatever.
So
Yeah.
Because everybody has old friends too.
yeah, especially with the advertising, there's like types that are specific.
Yeah,
Like
what
like,
applications.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna advertise cars, or like even where is it getting? Instagram, or is it?
That's true.
What platform? What platform is it? Because that's not really everything.
Like physical.
Maybe basically what it is.
I feel like it is, yeah.
It doesn't say,
However you
yeah,
reword
what you're
integrate
actually
work life.
work more than yes or no. Yeah. We have yes or no.
Yeah, it's way more than yes
Yeah,
or
so
no.
I
You can't do yes or no.
Yeah, so I think more argument.
I don't know about this one.
arguable.
Yeah.
More focused.
This one's kind of like, how personal creativity become an aspect of what do you, like, can you argue for once?
I think it's clear. I think it's
feel like
concise.
Yeah,
You have to
sure.
rewrite to make sure it's everything.
This first one?
Yeah.
That's one good research question.
You didn't realize like reading your class was supposed to.
Like, I wasn't even thinking. I was like, I'm in a whole nother class in 10 minutes and I ain't even noticed. I was in 4 hours across the street, so I was like,
I know, I'm
I checked my skills, I was like, this ain't right. Like, these people new to me. And the teacher didn't say nothing, this is crazy. I'm just sitting there chilling.
Did you go to the wrong class?
Yeah, I did. Like I was late, but like when I got here, I had went to the bar. And that's what I was saying. That's where I go Monday, and then Tuesday I come here.
Yeah.
But I got it mixed up. I ended up going there. I mean, I walked in, I was a little confused, but like, I just sit down. Then I was like, something right. I checked my skills. I was like, yeah, this is wrong class. So then when I ran over here, then I walked in.
Makes for a good story.
Okay, do we like this?
okay,
It
we
becomes too self-indulgent.
All right, take a couple more minutes if you need them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Working you guys on how to make it more arguable.
Okay.
Like, what do you want to see?
Yeah, we'll chat.
Oh, okay.
Do we like that?
We have to make it definite. How do we write this?
All right, so let's talk through some of these. Which question did you choose to interrogate?
Yeah, we need to focus.
Are we going like group by group?
Sure, go ahead.
Can too much creativity be harmful in journalistic writing?
All right, so can too much creativity be harmful in journalistic writing? So off the bat, what principle of good questions does that violate? Like without thinking too much about it.
Principle.
Complex,
Yeah, why?
because you can just say yeah or no.
You use a yes or no. Right. This is a fun game, by the way, if you want to, play with your friends or whatever. Is when people ask you questions that clearly they don't mean is yes no, but they are yes no questions. Right. So, or you can do it with your parents. Like, can you close the door? Uh huh. You just stare at them. And they go, please will you stand up and close the door? Right. So anyway, so yes, can, right, is a yes no, right, in this case. So it violates immediately the complex. So how do you make it more complex?
If you become too self-indulgent in the creative aspects of your journalistic writing, then lose its conviction as a professional.
Oh, so you're kind of linking that and saying that might be a more complex version of that story. So how do you get from creativity to self-indulgence? Where is the connection there?
Because to add your creativity, which is personality, into your piece, you have to be a little bit self-indulgent.
Okay, so chasing things that maybe serve your creative interests as opposed to maybe the true story. So jumping to that question, what does it? How do you make it? Less. I mean, in this case, it's really kind of maybe not concise, not really all that clear either. I don't know what self-indulgence is technically. Really.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else pick those questions? All right, what else did you come up with? So what was your final question?
Oh, I just read it.
Oh, yeah, go
It
ahead.
was too long.
Read it again.
Oh, God. If you become too self-indulgent in the creative aspects of journalistic writing, does it then lose its conviction as a professional piece of work?
Okay, so it still violates complexity.
Yeah.
Because it's, if you do this, then, right, so it's still a yes, no. Right. So yeah, so there's something in that question. Self-indulgence may be taking away the focus to what I hear being more central in there, which is just, what are the various ways that journalists violate some kind of, standard way of writing or principles of journalism or something, right? We say, if we assume for the sake of argument that these are the principles of journalism, what happens when each of these principles is violated, right? So then you have multiple research questions that look at each of those. So if you have 5 principles, you would end up having 5 research questions. What happens when principle A is violated? What happens when principle B is violated? What happens when principle C is violated? And that might direct you to, first just go out and search for journalistic pieces that have known violations of these different criteria of quote-unquote good journalism, right? And so just kind of to see how many exist in a sample of newspapers, over the course of the last year, whatever your time frame is, right? So just to ask how many are out there, and then those that are out there, you would need to construct some kind of study where you would expose people to those pieces, rewritten in ways that don't violate those principles, to see if people are making discernible, right, different kinds of conclusions from those 2 kinds of stories. What else? What other questions did y'all select? That group?
We did, how do social media platforms shape the way young audiences trust and engage with news?
Okay. So talk about that. What does it violate any of the principles of good questions?
Yes.
Okay, which ones?
It is arguable, but it's a one-sided argument.
Yeah.
And then.
So first of all, it's maybe not arguable insofar as it suggests an answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there are already examples relating to it, so it is relevant within our society, but it is already a question being asked in our society, it's already.
The trust and engagement piece. So maybe you start with that. You say, given declining trust in news among 18 to 24-year-old Americans, comma, right? What if any role is social media playing in that, or something like that? Makes it a little bit better of a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we also talked about how it didn't really ask what types of media and what age group.
Yeah.
It was concerning.
Yeah. So how do and really, so how do social media platforms? What is it about those platforms? Is it the engagement with those platforms? Is it the existence of those platforms? Is it the ways that news media use or don't use those platforms? So you're being more specific in terms of, what do you mean by social media platforms, and how, what do you mean by them shaping, right? Because their existence, to me, there's not a real connection between just their mere existence and anything related to engagement. It would have to be how those platforms are used by certain kind of entities. Good? All right. What else? Who else? Next group? Go.
The question was how is creativity defined in IMC?
Okay, how is creativity defined in IMC? What did y'all say about that question?
We said it wasn't very clear.
Okay, why?
Because it could have a variety of answers depending on who you asked. So it's you got that one. Also, how you define creativity, and then what definition you use. We said it wasn't complex either, because again, it didn't really pose a lot of questions other than how do you define creativity as a whole in IMC, and then concise.
Yeah, so so you can answer that question by opening a textbook. How is it defined in IMC? Well, here it is. The Introduction to IMC textbook that 80% of the universities across the country use, right, says IMC, or it says creativity is, right, done, right? So it's not complex in one way, because there are viable, easy answers to that question. I would agree that it's also not clear, because defined by whom? Are you interested in how practitioners define that term? Are you interested in how students define that term? Are you interested in how professors define that term? Are you interested in how textbooks define that term, journal articles, right? And the list goes on and on and on. So it could be more precise if you were to open it up to, you know, how do, chief creative officers or whatever at major ad agencies, right, define creativity, which would be a different question than maybe how students or how professors define creativity. There was another group over here that was working on the same question. What'd y'all come up with?
And we were all.
Oh, y'all were all together?
Yeah.
Like super group.
Super group. All right, next group.
We did what is the best way to ask questions to capture the audience attention in an advertisement.
Okay,
And we said it wasn't arguable,
why not?
because there wasn't enough like evidence and it didn't really like have a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and it's way broad, right? And what kind of advertisements? Okay. How did you reword it?
No, we were struggling with
You
that.
struggled with it.
We said it was clear, like it's pretty clear. We said it wasn't focused. It's not narrow enough, like we don't know what exactly like you're advertising or what platform you're advertising on.
Yeah.
And then we said it's not concise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not vague. And then it is complex. Like
Yeah,
not
it's
as-
complex, but it maybe is way too complex.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you, so if that is your question, kind of moving to what we're going to start talking about on Thursday, like what are the search terms that you use in Google to start your research? Right? It's unclear how I'm going to start doing that literature search. It's unclear where I'm going, like what search terms I'm going to be using in my databases in order to narrow that down. Right? So having to narrow that. So I think it's a little bit too broad. We got one more group?
We said, how does the use of AI-generated content in journalism affect audience trust and perceptions of credibility?
Okay.
We said it's not concise, it's pretty wordy, and like if somebody's reading that, they're really, who's gonna type in perceptions of credibility?
Yeah.
If they're gonna look it up. It's not, in my opinion, it's not super arguable in a way of like, well, there are so many different types of AI.
Yeah, so first and foremost, it is, what do you mean by AI? Do you mean images? Do you mean videos? Do you mean writing an article for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you, so being very specific about the kind of AI-generated content would be a better, more focused question, and would allow you to do a focused search in particular databases for research that would help you, And so this is the process, right? You ask a question, right? That's all I did on that quiz. I said, what are you interested in, right? And these are the things that you said you were interested in. And they're not sort of on their face sort of bad interest, right? So the idea here isn't to critique your interests, say you shouldn't be interested in creativity in IMC, or you shouldn't be interested in AI-generated content. Like, all these are really good questions, right? Fuzzy as they might be, these are good sort of curiosity-driven questions, right? They're just not, right, very arguable, clear, focused, concise, or complex, right? Or maybe some are arguable but they lack complexity, or some are complex but they lack clarity. So the process is, right, now that you have this kind of fuzzy question, I'm interested in robots, I'm interested in dating culture and what that, differences in generations in terms of what these terms mean. I'm interested in AI-generated content. I'm interested in self-indulgence. I'm interested in creativity. Whatever that interest is, great. Now, how do you use, right, these concepts, arguableness, clarity, focusedness, conciseness, and complexity, to come to a second iteration of that question, and a third iteration of that question, and a fourth iteration of that question, that enough to then start doing some secondary research to figure out what's already been done, right? Who has attempted already to answer how creativity is defined in IMC? Who already has tried to answer what's the best way to ask questions to capture audience attention? Who's already tried to answer in what ways can journalists use communications, blah, 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 right? And so what we start doing tomorrow, we talk about situating what you want to know, like these kinds of questions, in what we already know or think we know about that topic. And so you'll read about literature reviews for Thursday. And then we'll have a week, so all next week is really about, so if you think about, in one of your chapters, there's all these kind of dichotomies of research, basic and applied research, quantitative and qualitative research, like those kind of things, right? One of those dichotomies is primary and secondary research. Primary research means no one else has ever answered this question before, right? I'm going to be the primary person, right, that's going to find an answer to this question. Secondary research is somebody's probably answered this question before, right, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to, right, look at that. And then there's kind of a midpoint between those two things. There's kind of like, I don't know what to call it, like 1.5 research or something like that, where no one's really answered the question, but there are readily available databases that will allow you to answer it without you going out and collecting your own data. So you don't have to do the new survey, you don't have to do new interviews, you don't have to do new focus groups or a new content analysis. The data are there in a database. All you got to do is download that database and crunch those numbers or analyze those interview data or whatever the case might be, right? And so we're going to talk about kind of all those iterations, but we're going to constrain ourselves in the next week to secondary research and kind of an iteration of secondary research, which is like existing databases, like whether they're government databases or corporate databases or whatever the case might be. And so we're going to talk about that process on the 9th, and then we will meet next Thursday, September 11th, over in the library. And we'll have one of the librarians walk us through the process, right, of library research, and you will have already done 5 modules that they've created over the library to sort of orient yourself to the university library system, so that by exam 1, you'll hopefully have a whole sort of conceptualization, sort of realization of like, here are all of the tools that are available to me to begin posing research questions and trying to sort of figure out what do we already know about that particular question. And the best starting point for that, of course, is the university library. So that's where we're going. Questions, comments about where we're going? All right, so you'll have a reading check before class on Thursday, so don't forget that. Otherwise, see you all on Thursday.